to you and your family. It's time for Reliable Sources, our weekly look at the story behind the story, of how the media really works and how the news gets made. Today is a special edition, a chance to critically examine President Trump's relationship with the press at the one-year mark. Are alternative facts the new normal? Are partisan extremes here to stay? And what's the significance of all the leaks to news outlets this year? And later, it's the one end of the year list that you don't want to end up on. PolitiFact's top editor is here to share the lie of the year. But first, I want to take you back in time. You know, so much has happened this year, it's easy to forget some of the shocking developments. For example, when you hear these words, are you still shocked?
I have a running war with the media. They are among the most dishonest human beings on earth.
That is how it began. On Trump's very first day waking up in the White House, he turned on the TV and he turned angry at what he saw. Journalists were pointing out that the audience for his inauguration was smaller than Obama's. So Trump fired back, exaggerating his crowd size and then sending Sean Spicer out to defend him. You know, Trump even described the inauguration weather inaccurately. He said the skies became really sunny after his speech, when in fact it remained cloudy and started to rain a little bit. I think that's actually a metaphor for the year. Trump painted a dark picture of American carnage and then said he alone could fix it. He believed his world was always sunny. When Trump played loose with the facts and journalists challenged him on that, he couldn't stand it. I mean, here's an example you've probably forgotten. This is from February.
The murder rate in our country is the highest it's been in 47 years, right? Did you know that? 47 years. I used to use that. I'd say that in a speech and everybody was surprised because the press doesn't tell it like it is. It wasn't to their advantage to say that.
It wasn't to our advantage to say that because it wasn't true. Obviously, fact checkers jumped into action, trying to counter the claim that he was making about the murder rate. But, you know, Trump's really cynical, sinister view of journalism that we don't really want to tell people the truth, it came through in his comments all year long. Here's another example.
Radical Islamic terrorists are determined to strike our homeland. It's gotten to a point where it's not even being reported. And in many cases, the very, very dishonest press doesn't want to report it. They have their reasons, and you understand that.
There he is telling members of the U.S. military that the press was intentionally downplaying, even covering up terrorist attacks. If anything, the opposite is true. All year long, I heard anchors and reporters and editors reaching for new ways to say that's not true and that makes no sense. And all year long, I heard the president coming up with new ways to call us the enemy.
We are fighting the fake news. It's fake, phony, fake. A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are.
That was February. Now let's fast forward all the way to August.
Truly dishonest people in the media and the fake media, they make up stories. They have no sources in many cases. They say a source says there is no such thing, but they don't report the facts.
Some people have gotten numb to this, but these are really sinister claims from a world leader and totally unsupported by the real facts. I mean, heck, there were times this year that I used White House aides as anonymous sources because the aides would not speak on the record. Journalists don't go around making up sources. But look, the onus was and still is on us in the press to better explain why we do what we do. For example, why we agree to keep sources anonymous sometimes, how we vet our facts. Trump's daily media attacks have been a challenge and an opportunity. You know, so when he says something like this,
it's frankly disgusting the way the press is able to write whatever they want to write, and people should look into it.
Yes, look into it. I think the more that you know about how newsrooms work, how journalists work, the more likely you are to know that it's not fake. Yes, one of the president's favorite words, fake. He told his supporters all year long that the press was out to get him, out to take him down. And many people believe it. The country is split on this question, and it's an ongoing issue for newsrooms. So let's bring in an all-star panel of decision makers and newsroom leaders. Sally Busby is the executive editor of the Associated Press. John Avlon's the editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, as well as an analyst here at CNN. And Joanne Lippman is the Chief Content Officer for the USA Today Network and the editor of USA Today. She's also the author of the upcoming book, That's What She Said, What Men Need to Know and Women Need to Tell Them About Working Together. Let's talk about Trump's attacks on the media and journalists' responses. Sally, this is your first year as the top editor at the AP. But before that, of course, you've been at the AP for many years. Was this the most challenging year to be an editor?
This was a very challenging year. There's no question. Both the extent of the interest in the Trump story globally, and I think that's one thing that's very important. It's not just Americans who pay an enormous amount of attention to this. People all over the world pay attention to the Trump presidency. And it's been difficult to get factual information out of this administration. It's, I think, provided a lot of new challenges to reporters.
Yeah.
But it's also been such an important year, so important for the values that journalists hold dear, the importance of facts. And in some ways, it's been, although there have been a lot of challenges, it's been sort of a inspiring year in a way, in the sense that I personally believe that consumers of news are actually seeking out good journalism and actually understand its values. So for many of our journalists, there's been some affirmation this year, I think, too.
Joanne, are you seeing that as well in the traffic and the page views?
Well, certainly we're seeing there's a real interest in legitimate journalism. But I would also say I think one of the most important things within the media itself is to understand, is to not internalize what we're hearing. When we have attacks on the press from the president or anyone else, it's so important not to internalize that and
Well, let's be honest. That did happen sometimes, didn't it?
And it absolutely
People took it too personally.
Well, not just personally, but to take on the mantle of being the enemy, which the press is not. The press, our job is to shine a light in dark corners, to hold the powerful to account, no matter who the powerful are. And that's what we have to continue to do.
Marty Baron, the head of the Washington Post, said, we're not at war with the administration, we're at work. But John, do you think most people believe that we're not at war with Trump?
I hope so, because that is really fundamentally what's happening here. Look, we are a guarantor of liberty. We are not the enemy of the American people. The founding fathers built in the First Amendment as a check on power grabs, to hold the power to account.
But you feel like you need to remind people of that nowadays, don't you?
Yes, I do. But I think also people are being reminded that they can't take democracy for granted, that the free press isn't free. And that itself has an invigorating effect that I think is actually the silver lining we can take from all these conflicts. Because this is sort of advanced civics people are experiencing in real time. A lot of the old certainties about liberal democracy that I think people assumed or believed was ascendant around the world inevitably are being pushed back, not just at home, but around the world. So this is a time for the free press to stand up, for citizens to stand up and get involved, because the alternative is too terrible to imagine.
Trump certainly has forced conversations about profound issues, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the most important basic values that we all may share or not share. There's been stories this year about race and class and gender that have affected the White House. So in a way, he's enabled or encouraged some really important soul searching.
Yeah, it's the old. There must be a pony in here somewhere, and I think there are silver linings. I do think people are taking more civic responsibility. And I think you're seeing that even in subscription rates, people subscribing to newspapers and joining and membership models that they hadn't before. They were taking for granted that news content was free, but now they're understanding that they need to stand up and support independent journalism, that scoops matter, that investigative journalism matters, because that's what really holds power to account. And there may be great controversy around this, and we are all beset by social media trolls, and it's a bit of a novelty to be attacked by the President of the United States and the press, for some journalists personally. But I think we have to remain invigorated by the challenges and not exhausted, and realize that we have a gift of the fact that our mission is clearer than ever right now.
Thinking back to January and February versus now, I think there was a lot more anxiety early in the year among journalists, a lot more uncertainty about what a Trump administration was going to mean. Is it fair to say, Sally, that the worst fears some journalists had have not actually been realized, meaning there have not been an explosion of libel lawsuits? The press has not been kicked out of the West Wing. The cameras are still on in the briefing room after a brief period when they were turned off. That maybe our worst fears have not been realized.
I do think that there is some truth to that. I think that we did not get kicked out of the White House. I do still have some concerns about, the Department of Justice has said that there are a lot of leaks investigations going on, for example. We have some indication that the Department of Justice is still looking at some ways to sort of potentially eliminate some of the protections that have guided reporters in legal fights and things like that. And a lot of that is still up in the open. I think there's also, frankly, a lot of journalists have actually kept their nose to the grindstone fairly well and chased facts. And I think that has been the best thing that has happened this year. Every time we get distracted into sort of what I would call not terribly important fights with the White House, it takes us away from our main mission, which is to go out there and find out what is actually going on. What is the impact of the policy changes that are being made? What is happening inside the White House? What is actually factually happening? And within our organization, we have tried to say, do not get distracted by some of these more, sensational, but not necessarily as important disputes that have been going on, and try to keep your focus on what is really happening in this administration and your duty to report that to
That's
people.
been the most important thing, I think, this year that I have repeated again and again to our newsrooms is we've got to keep our eye on the ball, on the issues that are important, on the president's actions, not simply on the president's tweets.
Yes.
A researcher found that since 2015, the now president has posted about 1,000 anti-media messages on Twitter. So it does pile up. It does have an effect. John, I think it's a poisonous thing that he's constantly calling real outlets fake news. But to some degree, that is also a distraction.
And look, it is absolutely our responsibility not to be distracted by things that are intended to be distractions, to focus on the facts of what actually impacts people, not just radioactive rhetoric. But the larger issue I think that we need to confront is something that is quite sinister, and the president is advocating, which is blurring the lines between fact and fiction. Fake news in the context of the 2016 campaign is something real. It's stories written with the intent to deceive. They're sometimes for profit, sometimes for propaganda, but they had an impact on the election via social media. For the president to try to take that term back and direct it at credible news outlets, places that are filled with imperfect human beings, but who do check facts, who do correct mistakes, who are pursuing truth every day.
But what about the perception that journalists are so sloppy, they're making mistakes all the time? I mean, John, if you watch Sean Hannity show as often as I do, you must think that journalists are an evil species, constantly screwing up on purpose to hurt the president.
Right, and that would be false. But Sean Hannity lives in this sort of, glass throne someplace out in...
CNN did have 3 people resign because of an error. We've seen errors at other major news outlets as well. Brian Ross suspended this month.
And those are corrective. That is evidence of the fact that standards matter. And then when people make mistakes, they are, taken into account. I don't think, we should overcorrect because you're never going to please some folks. But look at also the source of the objections is an administration, unfortunately, led by a president who lies at an uncommon rate, even compared and especially compared to other presidents. So this disregard for truth, got to flow both ways, is coming from the president, not from the press. And we need to remain steadfast in insisting on a fact-based debate, recognizing that everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts, and we can fight on that ground.
Can I just add, though, on this whole concept of fake news? Now, this is something I think is very dangerous just as a meme. I've actually instituted a rule at USA Today and the USA Today Network, which is 109 local newspapers like the Detroit Free Press and the Arizona Republic. We don't use that phrase because it's not correct, right? There's false information, there's propaganda. We need to call it what it is. But again, by internalizing that phrase and repeating it ourselves, it's a real misnomer. It's not news.
Quick break here. Let's keep this going right after a quick commercial break. On the other side, we're going to look back at Inauguration Weekend. Some of the questions we had then and whether we have any answers now. Stay with us. We're just getting started.
No, but you had the interview of the year with Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State,
did not deny it. That's
who
right.
refused to deny it because he's not a liar.
So listen to what the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, has to say about Vladimir Putin praising the president.
I think this past weekend is illustrative of what a great case officer Vladimir Putin is. He knows how to handle an asset, and that's what he's doing with the president.
The General Clapper clarified he meant that figuratively, not literally, but he means it in the sense that foreign leaders, and I think there's some validity to this, and not necessarily the most nefarious way necessarily, but the Japanese, for example, have figured out how to deal with President Trump. You compliment him, you flatter him, you work with him behind the scenes, you don't take a stand against him publicly. There's something to this.
Yeah, look, Donald Trump is not a complex man. I mean, I think that's fairly certain. But that really goes to your question to Nina. How have the Democrats blown this? because they have gone out and driven Donald Trump into the arms of Republicans and conservatives. I mean, I'm sitting here a year into this term, stunned at all of the conservative things Donald Trump has been able to do. And it's because he's getting no quarter from the Democrats. The Democrats are just going after him hammer and tong, and he has no choice but to go and drive the conservative agenda and all the regulatory things he's done. I mean, this is an impressive lineup of things the Democrats are screaming about. The one chance, and they did. They had this. I forget what it was. Where Schumer and Pelosi did the short-term
over government funding. Yeah.
And Trump was talking right after that because they all said nice things about, oh, we should work together more. And they basically slammed the door on him. And he's now gone back into the arms of Republicans. So to answer Nina, you can complain about this tax. You can complain about everything. But you've blown this. You've blown the opportunity to work with this president.
I just think that's just ahistorical. It's counterfactual. It's false, Rick. The Democrats would gladly work with him if he had
Donald Trump is a conservative ideologue who actually wanted to do
No, he's an autocrat who is trying to enrich himself in office, and he's succeeding. The Republicans seem to want to help him with that, passing a tax bill that lines Trump's pockets. Democrats unwilling to do that. But the Democrats have done very well politically in the year of Trump. They won a landslide in Virginia. They swept maybe even the majority of the House of Delegates. So a huge landslide in New Jersey, much more blue state. And they won a Senate race in Alabama. Now, I know there was allegations of child molestation. It's probably not the best message
issue there. Yes.
but if you just explain it away like that, it's like when Scott Brown won the Senate seat in Massachusetts. All my Democrats said, oh, it's a one-off, it's no big deal. We then rolled into the worst landslide we'd ever had in a midterm. This is what's going to happen in 2018.
That was
a landslide, blue wave.
Substance that
Do you think that a Democratic wave is coming?
One would hope. I mean, I saw a survey that said there are about 391 people in the queue to run for Congress in 2018 as Democrats. Now, if Democrats can't win with those odds, then something is definitely wrong. There is a wave coming, but this is really going to be about who can excite their base. I mean, things are happening now. What's reality today might not necessarily be reality tomorrow, but the Democrats are going to have to get out there and make the strongest case possible using this tax plan as one of those things. The CHIP program, I mean, for God's sake, how do you not 9 million children land, right there at the mercy of Republicans, and you don't say that we commit to come together for 9 million children in this country?
But I'd say one point on upcoming races, I think Donald Trump drama does cover up a lot of the internal strife going on within the Democratic Party right now. Yes, they have an 18-point generic ballot polling advantage, but man, are they really going to bet their races on running against Republicans on tax cuts? Are they going to depend on having a Roy Moore in every race? And if you look at the disruption that's going on the Democratic side, it gets undercovered in the news. But if they're going to resort to Antifa-like tactics, which you continue to go on, they continue to get arrests every day in the U.S. Capitol. They continue to break buildings. It's happening.
But you're sweeping all Democrats with a broad brush like that? No, there is not one Democrat that I know of that supports any type of physical violence whatsoever.
I saw an event by Tim
not at all.
Shut down this weekend. I've seen people take over a mic by Bernie Sanders. There's going to be more attention focusing back to that. And if you can't get your house in order, you don't have a chance of beating Trump.
I want to ask one final question of you two, which is in the recent CNN poll, 66% of Americans say that they see the tax bill as doing more to benefit the wealthy than the middle class. This is a risk. Do you think ultimately it's going to pay off for Republicans?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think I just saw something, a report that 89% of people in New Hampshire are getting the tax cut. I mean, you're going to start to see the truth come out about this bill. There's been a lot of, frankly, inaccurate reporting going on about what this does. You saw AT&T, Wells Fargo, a whole bunch of companies now coming forward and say, hey, by the way, we're raising our wages. We're giving bonuses. This will trickle through, and that will be the reality instead of the rhetoric that was leading.
But you also saw other corporations who are giving benefits to their tax holders at the expense of the workers. And shareholders, excuse me. But I got to say, there is not one Democrat that I know of that believes in violence at any of these events.
But it does keep happening. It does keep happening.
There is a disruption in
Democrats.
Right, that's right. But there's a disruption environment going on, Jake, in this country to really push the political elites to do something for the people, and that does not mean violence.
All right. Thanks one and all. Merry Christmas to everybody here. While President Trump enjoys the holidays at his resort in Florida, kids and adults can enjoy his robotic replica at Disney World's Hall of Presidents. But what if Robot Trump got loose in the park and something went horribly wrong? That's the subject of this week's State of the Cartoonian.
Resolution number 1, binge more. Join the Uncarrier and get 4 unlimited lines for only $40 each. Whoa. Plus,
welcome back to State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. President Trump brought his bombastic attacks from the campaign trail to the White House in 2017. One of his frequent targets, his predecessor, President Obama. And President Obama has been, of late, hitting back. He invoked Nazi Germany when talking about the current political environment. And President George W. Bush, who rarely spoke out during Obama's presidency, has also on occasion voiced his concerns about the current climate. Joining me now, close confidants of those two presidents, Mark McKinnon, former strategist for George W. Bush, and David Axelrod, former Obama senior advisor. Welcome to both of you. I want to start with a question for both of you. This has been a remarkable year, the first year in what's been the start of a very unconventional presidency. You both worked for the two previous presidents, Obama and Bush. David, let me start with you. In just the past few weeks, President Obama has been, I think it's fair to say, increasingly vocal in some of his criticisms of President Trump, not just about policy, but also about the tone and tenor. Recently, he even invoked Nazi Germany in reference to the current political climate. Does President Obama see a danger in the Trump presidency?
Well, look, I think that the big concern, elections happen and policies change, and that is democracy. But democracy also depends on sustaining our institutions. One of the things that President Obama most appreciated, and certainly I did, was how President Bush handled the transition from one presidency to the next, and the period after. We weren't particularly kind to President Bush in the campaign, but he kept his counsel as to what his views were after he left office. And what you see now is a president who delivers hammer blows again and again to fundamental institutions of our democracy and adds to cynicism about our democratic institutions. And I think that's what President Obama was speaking to, and President Bush has spoken to it as well. Policies change, views are different, that's part of the system, but our institutions have to be sustained, and that's something that this president doesn't always appreciate.
And Mark, your former boss, George W. Bush, did something unusual for him. He made comments in the wake of the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville that seemed in some ways to be a rebuke of President Trump. Take a listen.
Bigotry seems emboldened. Our politics seems more vulnerable to conspiracy theories and outright fabrication. We've seen nationalism distorted into nativism. We've forgotten the dynamism that immigration has always brought to America.
And since he left office, President Bush has really tried to stay out of politics. What is he thinking when he says something like that?
Well, you're right, Jake. He's been staying off the radar screen to his credit, I think. But I think this just testifies to how strongly he felt about that moment. It's interesting, when you look at the speeches of George W. Bush in 1999 and Barack Obama in 2007, if you mixed them up and handed them to somebody, you couldn't tell which was which, because they both campaigned very strongly on the notion of changing the tone in Washington and had real respect for the institution of the White House. I mean, that's one thing that we've seen with Donald Trump, is that I think that both Barack Obama and George W. Bush worry about the institution of the White House itself and what's happening to it right now. And in a lot of ways, when it comes to tone and tenor of the White House, we've really kind of clawed our way to the bottom.
Let me ask you, the President Trump had an ambitious legislative agenda coming into office. So far, he's been able to deliver on only one major legislative victory, this tax bill. And there have been a string of high-profile failures along the way. The Republicans control Congress. They control the White House. Why do you think this president has had difficulties that President Obama didn't have with the Democratic Congress and President Bush didn't have with the Republican Congress?
Well, I was surprised that he didn't do what both Barack Obama and George W. Bush and most presidents do, which is find an issue where you can reach across the aisle, at least when you start your presidency. And that's why I thought that he might start with something like infrastructure. Instead, he went, right to the base, right to strip out Obamacare, and really, just poked a sharp stick in the eye of the Democrats. So The problem after that is that once that happened, the Democrats said, you know, well, why should we want to work with you if that's the way you want to start this presidency? But I don't think we can underestimate the tax bill is a big deal. It's a big win for the Republicans and for Donald Trump. And, you know, they got it done before the end of the year and maybe rushed it through too quickly. Maybe we'll see that in the long run. But right now, you know, at the end of the year, Republicans can say we have relative peace, we have relative prosperity, and for us, given the way things started out this year, we're happy to end on this note.
David, President Trump has made it his mission to unravel President Obama's legacy, including so many things he worked on, including Obamacare. He succeeded in repealing the individual mandate, removing the United States from the Paris Climate Accords, working to decertify the Iran deal. How does that look from the perspective of President Obama and people like you who worked closely with President Obama to get this agenda passed?
You know, Jake, I'm always reluctant to speak of it in terms of the Obama legacy because it makes it personal to him, and these issues shouldn't be personal to him. They should be considered in the context of their impact on the country and their impact on people. So when you talk about striking the mandate in this bill, which the president touted as one of its great features, although he said he didn't want to talk about it until after it passed because he knew it wouldn't be popular. It wouldn't be popular because 13 million people will lose their health care, estimated, as a result of that. That's concerning. Talking about undermining the Iran agreement is concerning, not because it was an Obama legacy, but because it could be very destabilizing and lead us into a greater period of conflict. And so all of these policies have implications that are serious. But I just want to say, I am not one who says that the president hasn't been impactful because he hasn't been able to pass major legislation until this tax bill. This tax bill is incredibly impactful, and we'll see if it's impactful in a positive way. I have my views on that. But certainly the steps he's taken to withdraw America from, as you mentioned, Paris, environmental standards that have been rescinded, regulations, consumer regulations rescinded, financial oversight regulations undermined. You know, these are big things, the appointments he's making to the courts. These may please some in his base, but they have long-term implications. Those are the things that should be concerning to people, not anyone's legacy.
A recent CNN poll found that President Trump's approval rating was at 35%. I want you both to take a look at this list of presidential approval ratings through December of their first year in office. You'll notice that President Trump is at the very bottom. Bush, 2001, he was at 86%. Of course, that was after the 9/11 attacks. Obama, 2009, was at 54%. Mark, what do you think is the reason why President Trump is so low on that list?
Well, it's been a chaotic year, and Donald Trump has governed largely to his base. So he's governed directly, and that base is about 35%. So everything that he's done in this first year has, unlike most presidents who, when they get into office, seek to broaden their mandate by reaching out across the aisle, reaching out to independents, reaching out to Democrats. And Donald Trump has just decided, for a variety of reasons, strategically and otherwise, that he's going to govern directly at his base, attack the media, attack Democrats, attack Republicans sometimes, in order to achieve what he has so far, which is a tax bill with 100% Republican votes and 0 Democratic votes. So, and listen, the media has attacked him mercilessly, and some would say he deserves it. But you know, the media likes to gang up on Donald Trump. That hasn't helped, of course, and so he has set the bar at a new low.
David, what do you think?
Well, look, I think I agree with everything that Mark said. I think a lot of it has to do with the style of the president and this constant sense of besiegement and you know, the thing you hear even among his supporters is, gee, I wish he'd get off Twitter. And you know, there is this impulsive quality to his behavior that makes people uncomfortable in a president of the United States. You know, the words of a president mean something. And he seems to fire them off without a whole lot of thought, and oftentimes creates controversies that are needless. So he, in addition to all of the catering to his base, I think he's also making people even within his base uncomfortable because of his style, which doesn't fit the grave responsibilities of the office that he holds.
David, happy Hanukkah. Mark, Merry Christmas to
Thanks.
both of you. Happy New Year. Best wishes for
Same to you,
2018.
Jake.
Really appreciate it. The key to President Trump's heart: praise, praise, and more praise. The simple formula to get on Trump's good side. And everyone from Republican leaders to Vice President Pence to Vladimir Putin, they've all figured it out.
Something this profound could not have been done without exquisite presidential leadership.
It's been a year of extraordinary accomplishment. So imagine if you ran out of retirement money.
Well, tonight, the backlash over Donald Trump Jr.'s latest conspiracy theory. The president's son says there are people at the highest levels of government who are trying to undermine President Trump and his political agenda. An accusation, we should note, that the president himself has echoed. Former CIA Director Michael Hayden calling those comments, quote, scary. But this is certainly not the first time Trump Jr. has peddled conspiracy theories. CNN's Tom Foreman has more.
Call it another chorus for the conspiracy choir, this time led by Donald Trump Jr., who is once again suggesting there is a secret plot to take the president down.
You know, my father talked about a rigged system throughout the campaign, and people are, oh, what are you talking about? But it is. And you're seeing it.
This is about the impeachment of the president. Yes. At the center of the claim, the idea pushed by some of the president's supporters that the probe into possible collusion with Russian meddling in the election is actually just an effort to delegitimize the results of that vote.
There is, and there are, people at the highest levels of government that don't want to let America be America.
For former CIA Director Michael Hayden,
that was a little scary. I mean, that is an appeal to the heart of autocracy and challenging the patriotism of those folks who work in the United States government.
Say something. But this is not the first time Donald Trump Jr. has embraced the idea of sinister forces trying to hurt his father and help his foes, especially Hillary Clinton. Trump Jr. pushed a fake claim on Twitter that Clinton wore an earpiece during one debate for coaching during the back and forth.
The facts aren't known because the media won't report on them. The politicians won't talk about them.
And they stay there. Like his father, he routinely accuses the media of pushing fake stories to hurt the president. Stories often allegedly concocted by Democrats, tweeting journalists they couldn't care less about the truth. He has routinely suggested Clinton broke laws and others covered her tracks, an advantage he claims his father never enjoyed.
If he did the same things that she did, he'd be, in jail for 30 years.
And he even resurrected old false claims linking the Clintons to the death of a White House aide. A common theme in all these conspiracy theories is the idea that there is a permanent clandestine group in D.C., a so-called deep state, to resist populist movements for change. The irony? The Russia investigators are considering the possibility that there was a conspiracy at work, and Team Trump, including Don Jr., might have been involved.
All right, and our thanks to Tom Foreman for that reporting. Joining me now to discuss all of this, Trump biographer Gwenda Blair. She's the author of The Trumps: 3 Generations That Built an Empire. You know, Gwenda, on this issue of embracing conspiracies, it certainly does seem like father, like son. Has it always been this way?
Yeah,
Okay.
in a word. His father, that's bread and butter to him. Blaming somebody else, there's someone else who's responsible. Whoever it is, certainly a lot of people think that's really why he won the presidency, channeling America's anger by saying somebody else got in line in front of you, somebody is taking it away from you, somebody else is to blame. And he's done that consistently throughout the presidency so far. Whenever anything goes south, someone else is to blame. And his son is doing exactly the same thing.
Going after the media for trying to hold the administration accountable. And by the way, we do care deeply about the truth. I want to talk to you about the president's daughter. Ivanka. There is this new reporting in Vanity Fair talking about this heated exchange that she allegedly had with Steve Bannon. She reportedly blamed Bannon for leaks. Bannon was then quoted as saying, "She's the queen of leaks," to which Ivanka responded, "You're an expletive liar." You know, we are used to seeing this very composed, very polished Ivanka, but is there another side?
She is very polished and very composed, absolutely. We did get a little bit of a crack in that facade during the campaign. You might remember she had an interview with Cosmopolitan when they asked her about the child care proposals that she was suggesting that the Trump have should he be elected, and why was he embracing these now? What was the timing? What was going on? He hadn't always felt that way. He didn't maybe what about his own employees? And she got very chilly, said you're being very negative, and didn't like that at all. So we have
I
seen
remember
that.
at the time.
Yeah, we have seen that. I mean, there have been cracks occasionally, and here was another crack.
So Vice President Mike Pence was criticized or made fun of online for lavishing praise on the president. In fact, according to the Post, he praised him once every 12 seconds for 3 minutes straight. Here's a taste.
I'm deeply humbled as your Vice President to be able to be here because of your leadership, Mr. President, and because of the strong support of the leadership in the Congress of the United States. You're delivering on that middle-class miracle.
As we see Trump sitting there, stone-faced, arms crossed, what do you see there?
He loved it. He absolutely loved it. He was eating it up. You know, people who support him, he figured that's loyalty. That's very important. An interesting thing about him, though, is that he also sometimes will pull in people that he's not sure of because he wants to see what they're doing. Keep them close.
Well, you know, and it's almost like Vice President Pence feels like he has to continually lavish praise on the president. I mean, is that how he makes people around him feel, like they have to boost him up all the time?
Well, in business, all throughout his career, which is what I covered in my book, and even during The Apprentice, now that he's in the White House, chaos, conflict, having everybody at each other, fearful of their jobs, not, never being quite sure, being unable to have really sort of horizontal alliances. No, everybody has to be loyal to the main guy, to Trump. If there's any hint of any kind of...
But he doesn't have to be loyal back.
No. Well, no, it doesn't go that way. It's only a one-way street.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Pence is a smart guy. He gets it.
He's like, I gotta keep lavishing praise. You know, it's interesting too what you point out. I was talking to someone recently who said that the president likes to make sure everyone is kept on their toes and that they don't have job security. Essentially, like he's always questioning what they're doing, that kind of thing, so that they can't ever feel just sort of too comfortable.
I remember one of the people I interviewed when I was doing my book, a woman named Blanche Sprague, who was an executive in the organization, and she said, really, her job was to go around and rile people up, to mix things up in the office, to make sure nobody was secure. Nobody really could sit back. That's what he likes to do. He likes that kind of conflict zone because that is Trump's comfort zone.
Right.
He feels comfortable when things are riled up.
Comfortable and confident.
That's what he likes. He doesn't want things to go back to normal, to smooth. He wants them to be riled up, everybody to be kind of fearful, because then he's the strong guy in the room, he's the one in charge, and that's the role he likes.
All right. Gwenda Blair, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Well, she has been on Donald Trump's side for decades, always in the background until now. And we're talking about his longtime personal secretary, Rona Graff, who gained a reputation as Trump's gatekeeper during her nearly 30 years working for the real estate mogul. Well, she's now been interviewed by the House Intelligence Committee in the Russia probe. CNN's Allison Cossack has more.
Rona, let me have the calls, please.
For 3 decades, Rona Graff has been one of Donald Trump's key gatekeepers. If you want to get to him, you have to go through her.
Thank you. Good job.
Even on TV, she summoned the apprentices to meet with Trump.
Hi, this is Rona in Trump's office.
He asked me to call you and tell you to meet him tomorrow morning at the New York Stock Exchange.
In the art of the comeback, Trump called her my very loyal secretary.
She would have possibly heard some of the phone calls. She might have been present in his offices for some of the conversations that took place, even sensitive conversations.
Discreet, efficient, loyal, a Trump confidant. As senior vice president of the Trump Organization, Graf is so much more than a secretary, according to Trump biographer Michael D'Antonio.
She's been keeping track of his schedule for 30 years. She's the go-to person if you want to connect with the president through his business enterprises. And even today, people will still go to Rona if they want to reach the president in a back-channel way.
Originally from Queens, the same borough as Trump, Graf holds a master's in education. After working in sports marketing, an employment agency got her a job with Trump, according to what she told Real Estate Weekly. In 1993, she married Lucius Riccio, who was then the commissioner of transportation for New York City. The mayor presided over the ceremony at the Plaza Hotel, which Trump then owned. Today, both in their 60s, they live on the Upper East Side of Manhattan with a daughter in high school. She's the reason Graf chose to stay at her job in Trump Tower, even when her boss moved to the White House. But as Trump's right-hand woman, she's now caught in the crosshairs of a congressional investigation. Her name mentioned in this email from music publicist Rob Goldstone to Donald Trump Jr. in 2016, promising dirt on Hillary Clinton. I can send this info to your father via Rona, Goldstone wrote, but it is ultra-sensitive, so wanted to send to you first. Now, House Intelligence Committee staff want to know what she knows.
I would say if there are bodies buried somewhere in the Trump Organization and somewhere in Donald Trump's campaign or even his more distant past, Rona Graf would be able to point out where they lie.
And that was Allison Cossack reporting. Coming up on this Saturday, an alleged Christmas terror plot foiled the popular American tourist spot that the feds say the suspect tried to target. And you are live in the CNN newsroom on this Saturday. I'm Pamela Brown in for Ana Cabrera. And we begin with breaking news. The White House denying a bombshell report in the New York Times out today that says during an Oval Office meeting back in June, the president became so enraged by the number of people receiving visas to enter the United States, he began to unleash on specific immigrant groups, saying of Haitians that they all have AIDS and that Nigerians would never go back to their huts once they have seen the United States. Now, the sources in the story requested anonymity, but I want to get right to CNN's Boris Sanchez in West Palm Beach near Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. And Boris, what can you tell us about this forceful response to the story from the White House?
Hey there, Pam. Yeah, the White House refuting this New York Times reporting. Let's dig deeper into context here. This apparently took place during a meeting between Donald Trump and his cabinet discussing immigration, and the president had just finished reading a document that was prepared for him by domestic policy advisor Stephen Miller that detailed the number of visas granted to people of different nationalities. And according to the New York Times, according to sources that they had in that meeting and those that were briefed on that meeting, the president said the following about Haitians. Again, this is from the New York Times. Quote, Haiti has sent 15,000 people. They, quote, all have AIDS, he grumbled, according to one person who attended the meeting and another person who was briefed about it by a different person who was there. The report details the president's reaction to learning the number of Nigerians that had been granted visas by the United States. Again, from the New York Times, quote, 40,000 had come from Nigeria. Mr. Trump added, once they had seen the United States, they would never, quote, go back to their huts in Africa. Recalled the two officials who asked for anonymity to discuss a sensitive conversation in the Oval Office. CNN reached out to the White House for comments on this bombshell report. Sarah Sanders gave us almost an identical statement to the one that she gave to the New York Times. Here it is, the press secretary writing, quote, General Kelly, General McMaster, Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Nielsen, and all other senior staff actually in the meeting deny these outrageous claims, and it's both sad and telling the New York Times would print the lies of their anonymous sources anyway. This coming on the first full day of the president's Christmas holiday here in Mar-a-Lago. It was expected to be a relatively uneventful vacation for this White House, and almost right away they are on the defensive at a time where they're really supposed to be basking in the glow of victory after having passed tax reform legislation, signing it into law just yesterday. Not a good look for a White House that has previously been accused of being insensitive to minority groups, Pam.
All right, Boris Sanchez, thanks for bringing us the latest there in West Palm Beach. And we're also following more breaking news developing in Washington this hour. FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe plans to retire. And already, President Trump is on Twitter attacking him. He writes, quote, "How can FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, the man in charge, along with Leak and James Comey of the phony Hillary Clinton investigation, including her 33,000 illegally deleted emails, be given $700,000 for wife's campaign by Clinton puppets during investigation?" He put out a second tweet that says FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe is racing the clock to retire with full benefits, 90 days to go. CNN Crime.
Hey, why doesn't he show his birth certificate?
Genimo, CNN.
God bless Trumpy Bear.
New York.